Welcome to the Mind Solution podcast with Sarah Maud. The Mind Solution podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. All right, welcome everybody, welcome our listeners, and I'm in for a real treat with you all today because I have got the privilege of being joined by Rohan Kallicharan. No, I've got that wrong. I had it right before.
It's still pretty good effort.
Kallicharan.
Kallicharan, yeah, absolutely.
Call centres must love you.
they do. I mean, in fairness, that's probably the main reason why, even with my first name, I normally just get called Ro. I normally only get the full Rohan treatment if I'm in trouble with my mum. So I think over the years I've been called any number of permutations.
Well, it's a delight to have you here. Rohan is the Director of People and Talent at Carbon Clean and is a very passionate mental health campaigner and trustee of the board at Mind. So welcome, Rohan.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be with you.
Brilliant. So what I'd love us to start by just diving into, wherever it feels right for you to dive into, is your own personal experience when it comes to mental health. So I'm just going to jump in. It's Friday.
It's as good a place to start as any, really. And you know, my passion around mental well-being has been driven by my own experiences of mental ill health. So I'm 47 years old now. So very evidently, I lived through the era where we weren't as open about mental health as we might do now. As a society, we weren't as educated about mental health as we might be now, and certainly attitudes were very different back then. Also, going to a boys' school, growing up in a sporting environment, you know, I think I had every stereotype around mental well-being and male vulnerability that you'd expect, and I probably, if I look back now, started displaying signs of mental ill health in my late teens. Around the age of 17, there were changes of behaviour when I went from what my mum would always describe as a very cheerful, happy-go-lucky individual to a quite moody, withdrawn, angry 17 to 18-year-old. The issue, of course, being well, that's exactly it. I suppose it's the old Perry and Kevin type thing, and you know, the whole premise of mental ill health is that actually it is so very difficult often to see, to diagnose, because the signs are so they're so small and so nuanced. You know, if I look back at myself, I would eventually be diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Now, if you looked at the rap sheet for bipolar, which would be, you know, it would include any combination of, you know, angry, irritable behavior. There'd be manic stages. You might spend recklessly. There may be substance abuse. There could be any number of things which just look like totally irresponsible behavior, and then you would crash into a depressive episode where you really can't face the world. So actually, for the world looking in, bipolar can very easily look like someone who is totally irresponsible, totally out of control, and then can't deal with the consequences of their behavior, so they hide away in a pit. And that's what it looks like. And in many respects, that was my story. I in manic stages, I'm very fortunate now that I never did abuse substances, but I would drink during a manic episode. My typical modus operandi would be rage. As soon as someone would challenge me as to calm down, I would be in, quite aggressive in my language, in terms of, I look back and it's easy to say that you're ashamed, but actually, I'm sorry, I'm never ashamed, because you can't control the things that happen when you were seriously ill. I just didn't happen to know that I was seriously ill at the time. And, with spending, I got myself into serious debt. When you're in a manic, you have no control over that whatsoever. And the long and short of it is that, I went from being an 18-year-old who finished school with great set of A-levels, went off to university. It was around the time when my mum and dad were going through a divorce. And ultimately, within 2-3 years, my world had absolutely crashed, because I was undiagnosed, going through these first stages of mental illness. I was in that stage where, everyone was kind of like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you, it's fine, you're just a boy growing up, you'll be fine, you're going through a difficult time, but don't worry about it. Or, sports people would be just kind of, just man up, get on with it, everything was all right. I self-harmed. It was a cycle which just got further and further out of control over a period of time. I left university after 3 years, having failed first year 3 times, which was fairly spectacular, really. And I tried to start a career, but I couldn't, because I was never present. When I was in a manic state, I couldn't work because I was agitated. I wasn't really in the right frame of mind that I could do. And when I wasn't, I was therefore often in a depressive state where I couldn't get out of bed and work at all. So essentially, you've got someone who is wrecking relationships, someone who is unable to hold down a job, someone who is becoming rent-a-friend with money that he hasn't got, and racking up huge debts to try and give himself some self-esteem. But actually, deep inside, I'm looking in the mirror, hating absolutely everything about what I see. I'm seeing my peers build their lives, and I'm seeing mine absolutely crash, left, right, and centre. And it's a horrible place to be. And again, you ask for help, but none's coming, because typically what will happen is, you might present yourself, as I would call it. I'd present myself to the doctors during a depressive episode, not a manic episode. So what they would do, especially back in those days, and there's no blame attached. And by the way, antidepressants have a great place for the right illness. For bipolar disorder, they were very dangerous. And what would happen, I would present myself during a depressive stage. It would be, yep, there you go, have a packet of these, see how you get on. Okay, that's a slightly abridged, flippant version of it. And actually what they're doing then is playing Russian roulette with my life, because ultimately you are giving someone with a mood disorder medication to elevate that mood even higher. So you're taking me on my manic from the top of Snowdon to the top of Everest, and when I therefore crash off that manic down into depression, it's a hell of a long way to go. And that is when my life was in danger. And that was the time at which I attempted to take my life on multiple occasions. And, I was very fortunate that by the age, I say fortunate, and I do count it as fortunate because actually we'll get to the conversation, Sarah, where, I'll always say I don't regret a single day of my life. I don't regret that it did take them until I was 31 and 3 suicide attempts to finally diagnose that there was a problem. I don't regret the carnage that caused for me and those around me, because I've been very blessed that I've been able to build something very special from it in order to help others on their journey now. And it did take until the age of 31, and I was very fortunate at that time that I was signposted to Mind, the mental health charity. And they were able to put me initially. They obviously they spoke with me, and I went to a peer group, and it was around the time when peer groups were really in their infancy, and I suppose I had all these stereotypes in my head around turning up at Alcoholics Anonymous type meeting with a small circle, the kind of things you'd see on TV, basically. But it couldn't have been anything more different, and you were able to say as much or as little as you wanted to. And I remember I said very little in the early stages, but over the weeks that followed, I realized that I wasn't alone, and I wasn't the only person who was going through, these types of experiences, which was a great starting point for me. And then they were able to get me back into the medical system, which was when I finally got the diagnosis. And that was liberating because you wouldn't bipolar has the highest morbidity rate of any mental illness. Amongst men, 1 in 6 will take their own life with bipolar disorder, and that's exacerbated when it's type 1 that I have. So it's a lethal illness, and yet actually I remember almost jumping around the room for joy when I was told that I had an illness, because I couldn't live another day looking in the mirror and hating myself. But suddenly the next day I was looking in the mirror with compassion, thinking, wow, you've come this far, you've come through an illness for this long, and you will actually come not only through it now, but way beyond that. And it's taken a long journey of self-discovery, of being surrounded by some incredible people. And I've got a strong faith. I believe God's blessing has played a huge part in that as well. I am one of very few people, I know this, and I understand, I speak from that privilege, that is able to live with my condition without medication. I live a very full life, and I'm very grateful for that. So that's the mental health angle. I think you probably only wanted about 2 minutes, but I've ended up giving probably about 20. But it's I think sometimes it's important to give you that context. And as we're on podcast, I know you can cut it out anyway.
Not at all, Rowan. And it's I was just genuinely spellbound listening to that story, and to just really connecting with you as you were talking, and imagining. I've worked one-to-one with people for 10 years. I've probably held about 10,000 one-to-one sessions with people who've been deeply traumatized. I've worked with bipolar, I've worked with trauma, I've worked with, goodness, practically anything and everything. So I really can get a sense of that pain that people experience, and I find it incredible that you were living in that pain for such a long time. And it's very normal, but it's also very sad that when we don't know what's going on, we don't have that understanding. And as you say, I mean, I'm not quite 47 yet, but I'm in the 40s. I'm in your box. So I do totally understand what you say about that lack of awareness, that lack of information, the stereotypical types. I think I actually still turn into Kevin when I go home from Kevin the teenager. I'm sure that I step in front of my parents and something gets triggered in me, but I do really hear what you said, and I think it's testament to you that you kept going. And I loved what you said about your faith, because I can imagine that your faith played a strong part in keeping you going, did it?
Well, I mean, I think it did, and it didn't. And I'll qualify that by saying there's never been a day in my life when I didn't believe in God. And there's never been a day in my life when I didn't. I grew up in a Christian family. It was never forced on me. So it was something that I've always been comfortable with in my skin, and very, very happy with. But throughout the darkest times, when I looked in the mirror and so detested what I saw, I couldn't see for a minute how God would believe in me. So I couldn't say that I was living my faith through those darkest moments, because it was just something that it was impossible for me to do. However, there was a very precious moment for me the day after that final suicide attempt, which was, and that was the day when I really did ask for help, because I don't know why I woke up that morning, and it's a story that I hear from other people who've come through this experience, where they finally just wake up one day and it's kind of like, actually, help, but I do want to live. And I did. I woke up that morning and I wanted to live. I think I was shocked I was awake because that, without being too graphical, I meant that one. It wasn't a call for help like the other two were. So when I woke up, I was kind of like, I'm not meant to be here. What have I, and then I'm suddenly, okay, I'm not meant to be here, but thank you that I am. But I can't keep on doing this. I need help. And of course I needed help from God, but I needed help from those around me as well. And all of the people who'd seen the car crash that was my life for the weeks, months, years leading up to it, I was able to turn around to, my mum, to a couple of others, and just say, okay, help me, please. And just being able to do that releases that burden, and it allows you to speak openly. I still had no idea what was wrong or what I was dealing with, but I did know that I wanted to deal with it. And I remember going into church the next morning, which was the first time I'd been to church for several years, and I just had that feeling coming out that morning, knowing, okay, I have no idea what's going on in my life, but I do know that there is light at the end of this tunnel, and that we will that I will come through. And that was enough to start the journey, for one of a better way. And then actually, it's so important with therapy. Sometimes it's about luck. And I say that it was because it was through an EAP. It wasn't through a choice mechanism that I was referred to, where the therapist I had at that time. It was through my mum's employee assistance program. And for anyone listening, it's a standard benefit these days. And I know we'll talk about workplace wellbeing, but crikey, not enough people use it. So many companies are paying a hell of a lot of money for workplace wellbeing, for EAPs, and there's just not enough people using it. Guys, girls, if you're listening, it's confidential. I'm an HR director. I know I know how many hours, I know the usage, but I would have no idea how many people, how many sessions, and so on and so forth. That's confidential. Do not think that there's Big Brother looking on in and knowing about your usage of the AP. If you've got that gift and you need it, use it. It's so important. And it was a huge part of my initial recovery through my mum's EAP. And I remember going in for the first session, and then I was still, I was a scared boy, and he's kind of like, so why are you here? And I'm kind of like, I've told your receptionist, kind of like thing. Why? And he says, why are you here? I'm kind of like, well, something happened at the weekend, and I'm not in a great place. Why are you here? I tried to take my life last weekend, and I really need your help. Great, awesome. And it went from there, because there was the moment where we drew a contract of absolute honesty. There was a contract inferred in that very moment that everything was going to come out in that room, and everything was going to stay in that room. And that was, it's a massive starting point. Again, when you meet someone that you've got, and it was that therapist who signposted me back to Mind, into the peer group, back to the diagnosis, and the rest is a long history. And but I think through all of those stages, if we step back, there are stages of grief, because I think you alluded to the strength of living through the illness. Now, I didn't feel very strong during that time, believe me. And in hindsight, yeah, I have to give myself credit for the fact I'm still here. And actually, no, I give God credit for the fact I'm still here. But yes, through that strength, I was able to prevail. And there is grief, though. Even through the illness, I was grieving the hopes and dreams that I thought had passed me by. I was grieving all the things I'd wanted to do in my early life. You want to find the girl of your dreams and marry them. I did, but I had to wait until I was 45 years old to do so. But you want to.
I'm 47. I've not met the man of my dreams yet. I'm not 47. I'm 43. Okay, God, come on, give it to me.
But you do. You want to do that. I wanted to play professional sport. All the things I wanted to do in disarray. So even while I was ill, I'm already grieving for all of that. I'm grieving for for the 3-bedroom house in suburbia. I'm grieving for all the things that I'm seeing my friends doing, my peers doing, that I've not got, because all I've got is this seemingly self-inflicted wreckage. I'm grieving for the degree that I didn't get, the job I can't have. So through that, even through the illness, there's that grief. And then you get to that first stage of therapy, that first, right, I want to get better, I'm going to do this. And then actually your grief is for that guy. Your grief is for that guy who's gone through all of the above. So, because my life did end that night. I think when I put my life ended as I knew it, because all I'd ever known was a life. All I'd known as an adult was a life of chaos, a life of unraveling, a life of manic depression, as they call bipolar disorder type 1. That's all I'd known. And suddenly you are faced with this moment where you realize you've got to try and live this normal, calm life. And it wasn't something I'd ever done. It wasn't something I knew. And you're already starting from you're starting as if in a handicap race. You're starting at the back of the field, because by then I've got debts, more than I care to mention. I had a criminal record for something which happened when I was in a manic state. You've got all of this backdrop of chaos, and I always describe it as being, I was literally an 11-year-old in a 32-year-old body. I'm this child learning how to live, how to function. And that in itself, again, that's another period of perhaps less grief, but that whole, you're actually learning to do everything from scratch all over again. And there are moments where it goes wrong. There's moments where it goes awfully wrong, and you've just got to back the people around you. You've got to back their resilience, because ultimately in that moment, a little bit like a drug addiction, all I want to do is go back to the wreckage of a manic episode. I want to go crazy. Crazy is wrong, is poor language in this day and age. But I want to lose it. I want to just get drunk. I want to forget that any of this is even happening. And obviously, because when I'm in a manic state, I'm not present anyway. So I had to, in those moments, trust the resilience of the people around me, who knew they were going to get a mouthful, just to bring me back down. And as we said, you go on that journey of a manic state being, literally, maybe 4. By the end, for me, it was probably 2 manic states a month, which is just, you cannot live like that. And actually it goes to a stage of being perhaps once in 6 months, to the point now where I've not had one in 6 or 7 years. So I think there's so many complexities on that journey of recovery, of through grieving, through uncertainty, through fear, through hope, through suddenly realizing that the things that you're doing are becoming second nature. And it's landmarks. For me, it took a long time, but as we speak today, for the first time in at the end of last year, my credit rating with the credit reference agencies is up in the excellent category. Now, believe me, back in the day, that wouldn't have been the case. It would have been county court judgment this, county court judgment that, because I was spending money I didn't have. So, all of it is such a learning experience. But I think that's it. And again, I speak from an ivory tower. I speak from the ivory tower of where I am now. And that's why it's so important for me in everything that I do to role model the right level of humility, the right approachability, the right way to speak to people of all different backgrounds who were going on their own journey. Because actually I long realized that.
Can I just pause you for a second, Rohan?
Yeah.
There's a question that would be perfect to ask you in this moment. So, having worked with thousands of people myself, so I'm trained in solution-focused psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, EFT, matrix re-imprinting. I'm a MAP practitioner. And so I have this huge toolkit of very leading edge techniques, which are so powerful
Yeah.
But when it comes to creating what I would call an insight-friendly space, and by an insight, you've actually alluded to many insights so far, where you had an insight, a moment of that aha, as we might call it, and it's that insight that creates that inner shift. What I find with people on a one-to-one level that's been a real game changer for them, regardless of what they've been experiencing, is to realize that whatever it is that they're experiencing isn't the truth of who they really are.
Yeah.
So when you talk about, hating yourself, looking in the mirror, and I've had countless people I know that have had that same experience. And when I explain to them, you know what, you have a thought in the moment. That thought is, I hate myself. And then you have another thought, which has to back up the first thought, which is maybe something like, you're despicable. And then before you know it, it might seem like you're thinking about yourself, but actually, in truth, people are thinking about their thinking.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that.
you're typically thinking about your thinking, and you're thinking about your circumstances.
Yeah. So it's all thinking. And it's like when we understand what actually thought is, like the power of thought, the principle of thought taking form in the moment, and people have this huge like, oh yeah, my thoughts are just, they're not real. Mostly they're very like automatic pilot, really bad records that I just have in this jukebox of my mind. And when they realize that they're thinking, that that's not the truth of who they really are, that's been really profound for so many people. And I'm wondering, when you talk about your own learning experience, what really created those insights for yourself?
There are a couple of things I can allude to. So, as I said, I got into trouble because in a manic episode, my rage took over, and I did something that I'd rather not have happened. But it did.
Sure, we've all done that.
I found myself with a conviction for common assault. Now you've got any way you can go from there, but I was very fortunate. I stood in front of a magistrate who said, crikey, this guy is no, his words, not mine, this guy is no criminal, but he's evidently had a very difficult time and actually needs a lot more support than he does punition. What I was actually sentenced to, sentence is the right word, what I was asked to do was a course called Think First, which was what they typically would send someone who might have drunk drive on. And it was a program through the probation office, which over a 12-week period you went in once a week, and it was a session where they really did look to work with you to change your first response, to try and understand what were the triggers for that rage, what was the trigger for your response, and really begin to unpick how we can respond differently in those moments. What I love about it was proof that you could unpick this in an environment that you wouldn't expect to. And it was, I think for me, I always think of that as being, it was not only helpful, but it was also very humbling. It really did humble me because, again, as I said, I had a very privileged upbringing. you know, it's not, I didn't have, my parents didn't have huge amounts of money, for example, but I did have a public school upbringing. They, you know, my dad came from poverty, made it as an international sportsman, and wanted to give me every opportunity that he possibly could. And my mum felt similar. So, you know, here I was, what was humbling, you know, here I was in this group with, you know, with guys and girls who had grown up the wrong side of the tracks and hadn't had the opportunity that I'd had, and for whom it had gone wrong. But actually, I found there was so much that was relatable on a human level, in both directions. I think, you know, there were guys on that course who almost looked up to me. I could never see why, but they just said, "You've got a way about you, and you'll come through these problems." But similarly, I felt the same way about them, because it was actually, it's easier to understand how you guys have got here, whereas I still can't quite understand how I did. But, you know, if I look back, that program was deeply meaningful, because it gave me my first insight, actually, practically, when it's about to go wrong, what are you going to do? How do you step away in this moment? And, you know, you talk about insights, that's the biggest insight I needed.
Great. So with all of that journey, as you say, and I loved what you said about not regretting that journey, because I suppose a bit like the quote that what doesn't break us makes us stronger, that you can share this to be an inspiration to other people. And I'm really curious to explore your thoughts around well-being in the workplace, because you're clearly coming at things from the insider's perspective. You understand the consequences, and despite working in this field for over 10 years, what I find personally really fascinating is, even pre the pandemic, the idea of well-being in the workplace was, you know, if I cast my mind back to when I worked in HR, which is about 10, 11 years ago, well-being in the workplace probably stretched to free fruit and subsidised membership. That's maybe about it.
Yeah. Cycle to work scheme was coming in by then.
Oh, I forgot about that one. Yeah, you're right. And yet it wasn't like we didn't have mental health issues. It didn't, like, you know, and even this word mental health, it's you know, to me, in mental health, I'd love to just call it health, because you can't have physical health without mental health. But fast forward, and even up to, say, 5 years ago, there was maybe the odd webinar. There was maybe organizations that were doing sort of well-being weeks, and then for the other 51 weeks of the year, we didn't talk about it. And we've gone through this pandemic. I mean, we work with organizations all over the globe, and yet, despite most of us having gone through, you know, even the most resilient of us. I mean, I do remember, I live on my own, and I remember not being able to go home for Christmas last year.
Yeah.
Because I lived in Scotland, and Nicola Sturgeon was like, she held us captive. I certainly didn't have my William Wallace freedom.
I'm not going to make any comments about parties or anything else at all.
But I was like, I'd made myself some dinner, and I was literally just crying into my dinner, because it was, you know, we're a human, we're not robots.
Absolutely right.
But even now, I talk to organizations on a regular basis that are reaching out to us about management mental health training, or our employee wellbeing portal, or something or other. And they've got often very little in place. Or they might have an EAP scheme, but as you say, nobody's actually using it. Or they in terms of wellbeing strategy, some organizations think having a wellbeing week constitutes as a well-being strategy. And I have to sit on my hands sometimes and bite my lip and think, no, come on, this is about education. But having gone through everything that we've gone through and knowing what you know from a personal experience, why do you think we're not further on to where we should be when it comes to well-being in the workplace?
Fear.
Oh, interesting. Talk me through that.
Fear. A fear that it's going to cost too much. A fear that everyone's got to be an expert. A fear that all my people are suddenly going to go off ill. A fear that there's going to be historical lawsuits coming left, right, and centre. Fear, and more fear. That's the starting point. And you know, if you break it down, there's absolutely nothing to be frightened of. Actually, it's essential. You've got to be frightened if you don't have it. And that can come from, I can talk from a compassionate angle and I can talk from a cynical angle as well. Both are equally as valid. I use the word cynical probably guardedly here, but actually just being totally cynical as an HR director, quite frankly, if I have the right well-being strategy, I'm going to attract better people, I'm going to retain better people, and my people here are going to be healthier and more productive. Actually, that's not cynical at all. It's just basic common sense. It's about giving people the tools to be successful in their job, and their well-being is right up there with any of them. Now, again, we go on to the fear of cost, etc., and that comes later. Look, I'd like to think I've run very good well-being within a couple of workplaces with hardly a penny. You don't have to have all the platforms in the world. Don't get me wrong, there are some platforms which are really good. Yeah, absolutely. But you don't have to. You know, in time you grow into that. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely a time where my organization right now, we're 60 headcount globally, and there's going to come a time when we will want the right kind of solutions. But you know, for me, it comes down to, you know, what are the absolute basic things are. It's starting a conversation and amplifying the conversation. It's teaching your managers to feel comfortable with being able to have conversations, teaching colleagues to see signs in themselves and others and feel comfortable having conversations. And it's ensuring that leadership role model the behaviors that you're asking of others. And that's probably the most important thing here. You know, I go back to, previous role where we did a mental health event where I actually spoke myself, and we had one of I had an external peer come in and do an unbelievable talk, and there were tears in the room that afternoon. But it was a Thursday afternoon. On the Friday, so many people came in and said, "Wow, what a great event!" And you know, mental health really has got to be forefront. And one of those with my sales director. He was kind of like, "Ro, loved that. We need to be all over this, looking after our people." I'm kind of like, "Yeah, absolutely, we do." Tuesday comes after the weekend, and one of the sales managers was kind of like, "Look, can I have a word? I've been really struggling with anxiety, stress over a period of time. I'm having a really difficult time." Same sales director was kind of like, he can have some time off to look after himself, but it has to be after he's hit his targets this month. And we talk about leadership, Rob. Oh, it really happens. And it's, you know, leadership have to role model the right behaviors. And you have to be prepared to absorb the short-term pain of finding out that things aren't as perfect in your workplace as you thought they were. Because once you amplify that conversation, it will start happening, and people will start, coming out. I'm going to use a phrase: people can't start coming out, asking for help, and it's brilliant when they do. And you have to be able to absorb. If it's been work related, right, what are we going to learn from that? How are we going to look after you in the meantime? And how are we going to ensure that actually it's not pandemic, that it, what if, is this an isolated case? And actually, from there, it's, again, that's where your upskilling of your managers is so critical, absolutely critical.
Well, it's interesting because I'm absolutely behind everything that you said there. What I find curious is we might have conversations, for example, with an organisation about management mental health training.
Yeah.
Now, some of the conversations, I have to smile because they're like, we're really behind mental health, Sarah. We really want to upskill our managers, but can you do it in 3 hours? I'm like,
yeah,
good. I'm not God. And you have to explain why, this is a big topic, because they say, well, we want our managers training on mental health. I'm like, well, what does that even look like? Because we could have you in a room for a month. Oh, no, we don't want all of that. We just want this, and this. And it's like, okay. But I say it's often people like HR or the wellbeing leaders or managers that come to us. And I'm like, okay, this is great. Trying to understand a little bit about what you need. Now, put me in front of your chief exec. And you can't see this because the people that are listening in don't have our faces, but there's this kind of really curious, why do you need to speak to our chief exec? I'm like, well, I need to understand what your chief exec's culture's like and what they're like, because I can tell all the things that you say. Actually, are they a workaholic? Do they even understand what mental health is? Or are they doing it for a tick box exercise?
Absolutely.
And it's like we need to be having, even if it is just management mental health training and it's a small organization, or even if it's a big global organization like Pfizer, it's like, well, actually, we do need to have the C-suite. We do need to understand what do they need.
It has to come from the top and flow down. The way I always describe it is this: the noise is amplified from the ground up. And again, people can't see my hands moving as I'm speaking to you. The noise is amplified by your people. So that does come from HR, employee engagement, well-being, driving that with colleagues across the business. So the noise comes from the floor and it's amplified. But unless everything is role modeled and sponsored at leadership, you have no chance whatsoever.
Sorry, I jumped in there.
Yeah, no.
Now, what would you, so there might be, say, for example, there might be some HR leaders or wellbeing leads that are listening to this, who, if we were to take a scenario where maybe that exec C-suite haven't really been involved in these kind of conversations. Yeah. So maybe you've got somebody like you in this position thinking, oh, I'm going to have to convince the exec team why they need to be involved in these conversations instead of it being just HR that get on and deliver that sort of thing. What would you say to those HR people that can help to influence them in getting the C-suite managers involved in the conversation?
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, there's going to always be different selling points to each individual in that leadership team. But essentially, it comes down to now that we are in an era We are in an era, and we were in it probably just before the pandemic, but we're definitely in an era now where well-being is at the forefront of every single EVP, whether you like it or not. Colleagues of all levels are now more discerning, and they're more demanding about how they are treated. So, we've gone from the stage where reward was the very top of the tree in terms of what's your wish list when you're looking for a new role or deciding whether you want to stay. It was all about reward. It was all about opportunity. Actually, the balance has shifted. Don't get me wrong, reward and opportunity is still there in our minds, but actually, what's my work-life balance? How are these people going to treat me? What kind of flexibility do I have? These are the questions that candidates are asking. These are the questions that my staff are asking. Do you have hybrid working? Do you have a well-being approach? So actually, it's genuinely, it shouldn't be a difficult sell if you have a leadership team who understand the drivers of attraction and retention. It is critical. It is absolutely critical that you are not just paying lip service to it, but you are delivering on your commitment to the well-being of colleagues. And that's holistic. It's their financial well-being. It's their it is their mental well-being, their physical well-being. It's a whole package that comes as one. And you've got to get this right. And actually, if I'm sat there in the boardroom, I would be surprised now after these last couple of years, if as an HR director, you are going into this conversation and you're not armed with exit interview data, which leads back to it.
No, absolutely. And it is interesting what you say about data, because one of the things that I'm always quite surprised about is, and I mean, I worked for a lot of organizations that were very global when I worked in HR. So I was the head of HR for British Airways Holidays, for example. I was an international business partner for Virgin Atlantic, and we did collate data. So I often find it really surprising that even though I've been out the HR world as it was for 10 years, I talk about, give me your landscape, help me to understand what's going on in your organization in terms of data. What does the data tell you? And I know we need to also read between the lines, but that's a good starting point. Or we don't measure it. We don't measure absence. And I'm like, my jaw usually hits the floor at this point. I'm like, why do you not measure absence? Surely this is common practice nowadays.
Well, you'd hope so, but actually, and again, if we really want to strip it back, we've got to this stage where we've got caught in this comfort zone of trying to step away from framework and process to make everything so loose, if that, for want of a better way of putting it. And I say I'm scaling an organization here. So actually, of course, we're a type of organization who want people to bring their individuality to the way they do things. We don't want to hire robots. I'm going to scale this company from 60 to 200 odd over the next couple of years. I don't want to bring in 200 identicates. I want people to bring themselves. I want people to feel comfortable bringing their full set of skills, their personalities, to bring that diversity of thought to the table. However, in doing so, we've got scared as HR teams of telling people where we need to, how to do things. And this is going to sound really simple, but even things like how we input absence into our people system, the processes have gone, I'll be kind of like, oh, was I meant to do it? No, your line manager was. Oh, he said I had to do it. And, you're in companies where no one knows whether the manager's meant to put illness in or whether the member of staff's meant to put illness in, which just leads to the fact that we're not getting reliable data to work with. And that's what it comes down to. So, if you've got to still have frameworks and guidelines through which you do things. I always talk about frameworks because a framework allows individuality within a set of guidelines. And I prefer that to talking about policies and processes. Let's work within frameworks of how we do things here, but you still get to imprint your individuality on it. But, with something like that, I talk till I'm blue in the face to my reports. I've got a small team here because we're scaling. We're at the beginning of our journey. But when I had a team of 8 reports, I was constantly data. I need the information if we're really going to make the right decisions for this organization.
Absolutely, and I love that, because you're right. If we had a conversation with any kind of CFO or FD, they need data. That's how they make decisions.
Absolutely. If I'm going to ask for a well-being platform from anyone, it might be someone on this call. It could be anyone at all. But if I'm asking for a well-being solution, you better know that my CEO and CCO are going to want a justification, and the best justification I can give them is data.
Absolutely. One of my very, very, very dear friends is a CFO, and she will always start with the data. But what I love about when she talks about it is where you said about fear around cost. We know the statistics that last time I checked, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but every £1 that's invested, there's a £4 return on investment in the right investment. I mean, not all investments are going to be right, but thinking about what you were saying there about fear, Rowan, and I loved what you said about fear, because it really, it's a very different angle and looking at it, but it makes a lot of sense. What do you actually think that organizations do really want? Because we do have some that are just tick box exercises, lip service, as you say, but from your perspective as an HR director, what do you think that HR organizations do really want when it comes to well-being?
Look, I can speak from my position here, and I can speak for our leadership team here. So we go back to the bit which I described as inverted commas cynical, which isn't cynical at all. But actually, what I want to do is to have an environment where people want to stay. So I want to attract the best people because I've got a great reputation, and I want to retain those people because we live up to that reputation. So ultimately, I want an environment where people can come in and we're giving them the tools to be successful. But what we have to remember now, and this is the crux of it, the tools to be successful are no longer just having the best Apple Mac, the best desk, and the best phone. Those were the tools maybe even 5 years ago. Who knows?
I don't think I ever had them working.
Your tools were cosmetic. The tools are now anything but cosmetic. People want to feel that sense of belonging. They need to feel that sense of purpose. They need to feel that sense of being part of something bigger than that they are. But they also want to know that they're coming in and making a difference. So even something like objective setting is so key to well-being. You think of objectives and key results. Some people do them so well, some people do them awfully. But if you're going to do something like OKRs, the key thing is that every single individual within that organization, and that's from the cleaner all the way through to the CEO, needs to understand how their personal mission fits into the bigger picture. Purpose-driven organizations. And purpose doesn't need to mean CSR in what you do. You don't have to be. I happen to be working for an unbelievable company making huge impact with climate change. However, you know, not everyone's going to work in that environment. You could be working, you know, for a big finance company, for, you know, any industry, but the purpose, the mission still has to be right. So we've gone past that stage where the tools are, you know, are simply material tools. We've gone to a stage where we've got to create holistic packages for our people, and that goes all the way through reward, well-being, belonging, purpose. You know, that it's a never-ending cycle, and you get one piece wrong and it sets you back.
And one final question, because I feel like I could talk to you for hours, but I'm conscious it's Friday afternoon and it's time to go and have some fun with our families. One of the things that I often find also quite interesting in psychological terms is about us taking personal responsibility for ourselves. Mm-hmm. So as you talked about with your journey, it sounded like you were trying to take responsibility. As you said, in those very deep depressive manic stages, it's sometimes very hard to even know where to start. But I know sometimes working with some organizations, they can get a bit exasperated because they might have some of the best platforms, portals, resources, access to apps, this, that, the other, free fruit, gym membership. They might have the whole Rolls-Royce package. And yet, when they look at, are people actually utilizing these resources, they're not. Yeah. And yet they know that people are struggling. And I don't always mean struggle in the way that we maybe think about struggle when it comes to mental health, because actually, I think that's sometimes one of the things that we need to really change is like actually.
Sorry, go on.
Like if let's say you've just not had a great week of sleep. Mm-hmm. I mean, if I don't sleep well, I can turn into the she-devil, and it can be quite a spiral for somebody if they maybe have had a poor week's sleep. Maybe they've had a new baby, and so they become quite entrenched in their thinking because they're tired, and it really can spiral. But where we're giving these resources to people and then people just aren't utilizing it.
So it comes down to the V word, vulnerability. And when it comes to well-being, we've made huge strides societally. And there's a lot of things, and I use this, in a number of keynotes that I give. Societally, we have become comfortable with a number of things which we needed to, but we have still not yet become comfortable with being vulnerable. So the reality is you can have all of the facilities, all of the services in the world for your staff, for your teams. However, if your culture doesn't encourage vulnerability, what's the point? You've got to drive open conversation. That's where it starts, and that's much more valuable than having all the tools in the world. Because if there's no conversation, you've got no chance. And the other problem you've got, especially now in this, are we calling it post? We're not post-pandemic. So I'm just in this enduring pandemic world. But as we move further and further to a hybrid working piece, the biggest challenge for HR teams is going to be presenteeism. And I'm not saying I have the answers for that yet, but that's going to be seismic in the impact on people's well-being. You know, if you give the type of example is, because people are working remotely now, there's this sense of, it's all right, I'm working remotely, so I can log on for half an hour, but then I won't be on for the rest of the day. Or, I'll log on and check my email, and then I won't be. And because you can, you do. And actually, number one, you end up not tracking absence to know how ill or well people are, because as far as their manager's concerned, oh, they worked that day. They might only have worked for 5 minutes, but they worked that day. You're putting untold stresses on the rest of the team who are going to get ill because they are ending up covering someone who through no fault of their own is ill, but being counted as present. And ultimately, you have the capacity for really, difficult challenges organizationally and for individuals, unless we can, move away from that. And we're going to have to be strong enough to tell people when they are working remotely, it's really simple. We don't mind if you're ill, of course not. And actually, I will with someone with mental well-being, or any kind of well-being issues, listen, and I'll say, take that time off. And you know what? We do have a policy for how many days we'll pay you full sick pay, but if it's justified, policies are there to be overwritten. And fortunately, as a director of people and talent, I can do that. So I have no problem with where it's justifying you taking the full time off to get the support you need to be well and to come back ready to go. But what I can't have you doing is logging in and out, trying to work when you're ill, and actually your manager not knowing whether you're working or not, you not knowing whether you're well enough to work or not. You are either here or you aren't. And it's really difficult conversation to have. So, for me, as I said, I've gone off on one again there.
I was following.
I think the presenteeism piece is massive.
Yes, I agree. And I think going back to what you were saying about upskilling our managers, because my person, and it is only a personal perception, is where we are operating in a hybrid model. If managers aren't checking in with people on a regular basis and doing that with cameras on and really asking those questions like, how are you really getting on this week? Instead of just, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine. Okay, let's go down to our objectives. Yeah. Let's look at our project plans, because we know that people get very good at hiding mental health issues. And in this hybrid world, we're running a huge risk, aren't we? Yeah. With not having that interaction, because we're not going to be able to pick up on some of those physical cues, which is why it's so important we're upskilling managers with that ability to really listen and connect with people online.
Absolutely. And I confess I've not yet implemented it here, but we had a really simple model when we were in that place of remote meeting after remote meeting. Every time we had a team check-in, everyone just kind of like, we went around the room, someone put up and just literally type into the type pad, out of 10, how are you feeling today? And if it was a 1, no one asked a question. Didn't matter. No one was going to ask you. We just wanted to know how people were, because you could make allowances. And then obviously if I saw a pattern with one of my team kind of like consistently kind of like, well, I'm 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10, then I could pick up in their one-to-one kind of like, okay, talk me through what's going on, because I'm not with you every day at the moment, so I can't see it.
One thing actually I really like is because I often find that people spend so much time in their head and not in their body, is a similar model to that, but actually to verbalize, use one word to sum up how you're feeling in this moment. Not today, your feelings can change, but just what's one word that describes how you're feeling right now? Because actually that gets people to check in with themselves.
Definitely.
Once they verbalize, well, I'm actually good, or I'm frustrated, or I'm angry, even just acknowledging that, it can be a bit like, oh, I actually feel a little bit better.
Sounds like my wife, typically, she'll be the first one to tell me, what is wrong with you? She'll kind of like, you are in a strop, and I'm kind of like, there's nothing wrong with me.
Kevin the teenager.
And then I'll go out for a run. I'll come back with a smile on my face. I'm kind of like, yeah, all right, sorry. It's definitely definitely that one. I mean, you can give people all the advice in the world, but you can still be that horse who kind of like, when it gets to the water, kind of like, no, I'm not drinking from that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, if you want to stay on the line, Rowan, but I think that's a wonderful place to leave the conversation. Thank you so much for your genuine, well, your vulnerability to even share your story. And I can absolutely imagine that that will be really inspirational to so many people, whether they're struggling with mental health, whether they really resonate with what you've talked about in terms of bipolar, or even just for HR and business leaders that can get so much value from this conversation. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And for everybody that's listening, we'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments. Pop them in the comments box, and we will be back again next week. So have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much for having me.